Going to work the way I set it up to. And then you get up here and you're like, did I charge my clicker? Is there batteries in it's not that you couldn't hear me if I didn't have batteries in this microphone. Hey, what's the deal with that? Quit pressing buttons. I didn't push any. He always just messing with me, trying to make me think I got everything going wrong here. Now that the kids are in here, man, the faces of children just baffle me sometimes. I mean, I'm new at this. I've only been in it for about 4 years. And some of them have been in it a lot longer than I have, but kids are weird. They are weird. Oh, thank you. Okay? Right now, just pray for me. My daughter's in this phase where she's obsessed with certain things, right? She gets obsessed with a toy she's playing with. She gets obsessed with her new thing is finding roly-polies in the front yard. She's asked every morning for the last 5 days, can she go find roly-polies in the front yard? Because one day she went out there in the morning when it was cool and not 140 degrees outside, and she found like 30 roly-polies and put them in this box. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you going to do with those? Oh, I don't know. You should put them back in the grass so they can live. No, put them outside. You can't play with them outside. And then the other day we're getting ready to go somewhere, and she grabs one of these things on the ground, and I say, put that down, and I put it out of her hand, and I put her in the car, and she starts flailing and screaming, and I'm like, what in the world? But isn't that like some of us sometimes? God has, we do something, or we want to do something, or we're obsessed with something, or we hyper focus on something, and God says no and picks us up, and we're like, ah! It's an attitude problem, right? It's an issue internally. I want what I want. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. God, you can tell me what to do, but it doesn't mean I'm going to listen. I remember when I was a very new Christian, probably 3 months, I wanted to just tell everybody everything I had learned. And I had no background. I had no understanding. I just learned these verses. I thought they were so cool. I thought everybody needed to be baptized. I thought everybody needed to follow Jesus. And I couldn't understand why they didn't want to. Why don't people want to follow Jesus? He's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and he has been for the last 2,000 years, and people can't seem to get that through their thick skull. But again, it comes down to, I'm going to do what I want to do, and because God doesn't allow that, well, my hands are up. And then you come into the 21st century world, and you're around people, and you're like, why is the church so unappealing to some? I mean, you ever asked yourself that question, sat there and go, like, why don't people want to come to church? Why don't people want to sit here? Why don't people want to be a part of us? Why don't people want to do what we do and share what we share? I mean, it baffles me at times, and I could tell you all the assumptions I have about the answer to those two questions. But if I sat here and told you what my assumptions were, I probably wouldn't be right about most of them. I was a very new Christian. And there was this young man who, again, was, because back in 2011, 2013, how guys came to the church is they started dating girls that were already in the church. Okay, I was one of those. I had another friend that was one of those, and another friend. There was all sorts of girls, no guys. Okay, so all the guys came from the outside because the girls were going out and finding the guys and bringing them in. Well, this young lady who was a part of our young college group that we had going in Woodland, she starts dating this guy. I have no idea. I mean, he's ex-military. Seems to have a really good job, make lots of money, brings them to church, they're dating, and I hear what he is telling me, that he's a believer, and he was a part of this church, and he was doing this thing, and he was, and there was this divide, because on the other side of that, she's telling me, oh yeah, he's trying to pull me away from the church to take me to this other church. And I'm thinking in my mind, wow, that sounds really bad. That doesn't sound like it's a good thing. And so what do? Being overzealous, new Christian Nick, I say, hey, you want to have a Bible study? So I bring him over to the house and we start talking and we start working through some things. And we get to the subject of baptism, which everybody in the Church of Christ, we always get to baptism. We always talk about baptism. We put it on a pedestal. It's always about baptism. We got to get to baptism. We start talking about baptism and we're going through all the verses. And he says, yeah, I've been baptized. And I'm thinking to myself, because again, the backstory to this is I had been taught that if you weren't baptized in the Church of Christ, you weren't baptized properly. And so my way of thinking was that this person he'd been baptized, but he hadn't been baptized in the right place. But what I didn't do was listen to him. Because if I would have listened, I would have known that he would have done what he did for the right reasons. I would have known what he did, why he did according to Scripture. And because of my lack of knowledge and my inability to listen, man, I'm still working on that. I have this problem where, again, I want what I want, and I'm going to listen to what I want, and I'm going to go to where I want. And again, it circles around to this idea. Let's see if I can get it back here. That attitude is often the problem that prevents us from reaching people. And it's the problem for many other areas of the Christian life. The idea of attitude and how we see people and how we treat people and how we look at evangelism. Because I'll tell you, for a long time, I just looked at people like prospects. Oh, I'm going to get that guy in the water, going to get that guy in the water, going to get that lady in the water. Oh, I'm going to get Bible studies with this people and that person and this person and that. And I just had this mindset that everybody's a prospect. Because that was my thought process. But what I realized along the way is that if I seek to build relationships and make friends, I can influence more people than if I try to get 1,000 Bible studies in a week, and that's not my strong suit. My strong suit is connecting with people. My strong suit is helping people to trust in Jesus. My strong suit is teaching people how to understand and interpret Scripture so that they can live better. And when the time comes that they're ready to choose that next step in their faith journey, and they want to do that, I'm 100% in support. But I found myself in this place that if I look at people like they're just prospects, because then I can't love them like I can love a friend. I can love people better if I see them as friends rather than just another person to wash in the water. And again, it's circled back around to my attitude. It's circled back around to what I was thinking, to the way that I was moving, to how I was trained. It was my attitude. But as I read more of Jesus, I saw a completely different figure. As I read more of Jesus, I saw this individual who loved and cared about people and was just looking to restore those lost and bring them back in. Those people who, from the time they were infants, lived a life of faith and religion and believed in God and practiced synagogue and went to temple, but somewhere along the way lost their love for the Lord. And I see those instances in places like John chapter 4 where Jesus encounters the woman at the well. And I see that in places like John chapter 5 where he comes to the pool of Siloam and he sees this man who's been sick for 38 years. And he asks him this question: do you want to be made well? And the attitude, what I found is that the attitude of Jesus is much different than my human attitude. In fact, my human attitude is more along the lines of a Pharisee than it is along my God. And that breaks my heart. And I know that I'm not the only one. And I know that I'm not the only person that has struggled with this or dealt with this, but I want to look at Jesus and I want to mirror that attitude. And I want to listen to his Spirit. And I want to go where he says to go. But my own will gets in the way of what God could do through me if I just said, okay. So there's this story of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. And it's centered around the writer himself, Matthew, who was a Jew, and as we're going to see, he was a tax collector, and he was apparently a wealthy individual who had been working for the Roman government, but different sections of Jewish teachers and groups had seen those tax collectors as traitors. They'd seen these people, these individuals as betraying the Roman government. How could they ever follow God or do what's right if they're betraying? And so Jesus shows us what it looks like to see someone who's not like us. This is the amazing thing. People who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. Nothing like him. And here he is. He walks up to a tax booth. He sees a man called Matthew sitting there. And he says to him, "Follow me." And you wonder, what did Matthew see? What did Matthew witness in the time that Jesus had been walking around the town of Galilee and Capernaum and all these ancient places, that when Jesus said, "Follow me," Matthew went, "I'm going." Because that's what it looks like. And they get up, and he does. He follows them. And as they reclined at the table in the house, behold, many. So you're telling me that Matthew had other friends that were tax collectors and sinners and people who, according to the Jewish teachers, could do nothing right and were always going to be unrighteous. And here's Jesus sitting at a table with people who are nothing like him, loving for and caring for people who were nothing like him. He reclined at the table in the house with many tax collectors and sinners, and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And here comes the kicker. The Pharisees walk in the door. Now pay attention to what Jesus saw in Matthew chapter 9. What did he see? He saw a man sitting at the tax booth, and he called him and he said, "Follow me." And he followed him. Here's what the Pharisees see. This is what Matthew is trying to contrast. Now, if you look back at the context and you go up to chapter 1 and verse 1, you see the paralytic, and you've got the Pharisees saying, "Jesus is blaspheming." And then this passage where they're asking a question, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And then you go down a little further into verse 14, and you look at John's disciples, and they've come to ask Jesus this question: why do the Pharisees and fast and my disciples fast, but your disciples don't fast? We want to know the answer to this question, Jesus, because it's puzzling us, and we can't understand why it is that you're not doing what we're doing. Aren't you supposed to be a Jew? Aren't you supposed to just fall in line? Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? That's a curious question. A righteous man, a rabbi, seen as a teacher. Why is he eating with people who are unclean, unrighteous? But when he heard, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." So yeah, Jesus could have had this attitude like, "Hey, I don't need to be around these people. They're unclean. I don't need to be around these people. They're not good for me." But instead, he saw a need and he filled it. He saw people who were far away from God and brought them near. He saw people who were sick, and he brought them to the healer. And if we can mirror this kind of idea, this kind of attitude, what would the church look like? If we just saw ourselves in a position, maybe like the friends of the paralytic in Mark chapter 2, we're just bringing our sick friends to Jesus, and we'll let him change. We'll let him heal. We'll let him do what he needs to do. Not me. I'm not going to, I could probably persuade a couple of people. Maybe. But persuasion is different than transformation. Transformation comes eternally, and I don't see what is internally inside somebody, but God does. And that's why God can use a rock hammer, and he can knock that hard heart out. And he can give you a new way of seeing things. And he can transform and change your life. The sick need a physician. Look what he says next. "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I came," look, here's the kicker, "for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." So tell me, who's righteous? I want to know. If he came to call the righteous, well then, I'm already there, right? No, he came to call sinners. He came to call people who were nothing like him. People who were lost, people who were forgotten, people who were sick, people who were full of ailments, people who were dealing with things that we probably can't even imagine because we have it so good in America, we're blind to everything else. And we ask this question, why don't people want to follow Jesus? Why do you need anything when you have everything? Why do you need anything if you have everything at the palm of your hands? And it's the people at rock bottom that are looking for a place to go, looking for someone to heal them, looking for someone to find them, looking for someone to bring them back. And yet we find ourselves in this place where often we're trying to change. And here's the thing, we can't change people's minds. We can't change their minds. God can. I can't. But what I can do is change myself. What I can do is see the problem with my attitude, the problem with my flaws, and I can fix them. And then we got the Apostle Paul, who writes, 26, 27 books of the New Testament? Writes a ton. Goes all throughout the world, right? Goes all throughout the world preaching the gospel to the Gentiles, right? People who were in complete contrast to Judaism. People who, the Jews just did not associate with and did not come in contact with and did not deal with because they're unclean. They're not like us. We can't be around them. We can't be close to them. And yet here's Paul, a Pharisee himself, changed on the road to Damascus, becomes a disciple, becomes an apostle, and a prominent pillar and figure in the church in the first century. And he writes to this group that's in Corinth, who's having a lot of problems. If you know anything about Corinthians, there's a lot of problems in Corinth, yet they're still called the Church of God. Keep that in mind. There's a lot of problems in Corinth. They're dealing with all sorts of, what do we do with meat sacrificed to idols? And, what do we do with the people who disagree with us? And what do we do about marriage, divorce, and remarriage? And what do we do about what is the temple? And they're having all these debates and all these controversies. And Paul says, let me clear it up for you. Let me clear it up for you. Here's what I want you to do. And he gives them this whole 16-chapter book on what he wants them to do and how he wants them to think. Now, in between those, he uses this phrase, now concerning, when he starts a new topic or he starts a new idea. He says, now concerning XYZ. And he'll say something like that. Chapter 12, chapter 7, chapter 16, chapter 8, it's all there. And he switches on these topics to try to help them clarify what it is they're supposed to do. Well, in chapter 8, he begins talking about meat sacrificed to idols. Right? He starts talking about, okay, well, what are you supposed to do? You're having this controversy. And he gets to chapter 9, and he says something that I find rather striking. In the midst of a very heated and intense conversation, he says, for though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. You see, Paul has a mindset that's in contrast to what the Corinthians are dealing with. They're sitting there going, no, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. And everybody's pointing the finger. And everybody's saying this, that, and the other. And Paul's letter is a letter to unity. Paul's letter is a letter to try to get them to come together. Paul is looking for, he's like, look, this is my attitude. I'm free from all. I'm not bound by any chains of any religion, of any people. I'm free from all. But guess what? I choose to make myself a servant of all for the sake of winning more souls, for the sake of winning the people who are unwinnable. If I were to just remain myself, it says to the Jews, I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. Look, you have a problem with meat sacrificed to idol? No, I'm not going to deal with that. right? You have a problem with this? No, I know how to act in front of a Jew so that I can win a Jew, so that I can win that person, so I can bring them to Jesus, right? To those under the law, I became as one under the law, that I might win those under the law. And he's fairly simple. To those outside of the law, I became as one outside of the law, not being outside of the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside of the law. You see the common theme here? It's an attitude. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking. And when we have a bad attitude or a bad mindset, it closes doors. I'm not going to do what they tell me to do. Why am I going to be that way? I'm free. I'm not bound by anybody's laws, anybody's chains. I can do what I want. That's kind of the attitude in America, isn't it? I'm going to do what I want. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. But I think Jesus followers need to be different. I think Jesus followers need to assess the situation and go, okay, if I'm just getting to know this person and I'm building a relationship with them and I'm trying to teach them the gospel, because the other side of the problem with teaching people you don't know the gospel is that if you don't have any history with them, you can't teach them anything. You can't, there just doesn't connect. But if you build a relationship with that person and you say, we have some history, we have some background, we're friends, we do things together, then it becomes a lot easier to begin influencing them for good things. But maybe that friend has particular beliefs or views or struggles or troubles. And you've got to become something different in order to win them. I'm not talking about change behavior. I'm not talking about acting unchristlike. I'm talking about understanding that you have a right, but because somebody else sees it differently, you do things differently. It's an attitude. It's a mindset, right? And then he says this, to the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. So even Paul himself knows that he's not going to save everybody. Even Paul himself knows that everybody he comes into contact with is not going to say, yes, I received Jesus. Because that's not how the world works. But maybe we can up our chances if we just had a better attitude. And that could go for a lot of things, couldn't it? That could go to the overflow of worship and family and friends and work. If my attitude changed, what would my environment be like? If my attitude changed, what would I be able to do? What would I be able to help people with? Right? And then he drops this kicker. He says, I do it all for the sake of the gospel, for the good news, that I may share with them in its blessings, the blessings of the gospel. This is what I do it for. I want to share the blessings of Christ with other people. And I know people need Jesus. And I want people to see him. Not everybody's going to say, yeah, I'm good for it. In fact, a lot more people are going to reject it than they are going to accept it. And in today's world, let me tell you, the thing that I've learned the most is, I'm not going to change anybody's mind. In fact, I've been going to the gym for almost 2 years now, and over that period of time, I've made a lot of friends. I see regulars in there. I see people I high five and fist bump and all sorts of things. And then I have people in there that I have deep spiritual conversations with, because they're struggling or they're working through something, or they have a past or history, in church, and they had a bad experience with somebody who was acting hypocritical or doing something wrong, and so the bad taste in their mouth makes them go, no, I'm good. In fact, one friend in particular turned completely to paganism because of his bad experience with churches, and I'm thinking to myself, in my mind, I'm thinking, what? Why? And he's explaining this experience he had with this church when he first moved back from Hawaii to California. And he said, I started getting really involved in this church, and he's a highly observant person. And so he watches everything everybody's doing, and his intake is and he said, I was sitting in church one day, and I got really close with the preacher. And we kept talking, and he was mentoring me, and he was influencing me, and then saying good things to me and telling me what to do. And then all of a sudden, the church gets big. There's problems in his marriage. he cheats on his wife, he ends up divorced, he leaves, the church is... And he's like, why do I want to be a part of that? And I kept trying to tell him, not every church is like that. Not every group of people is thinking that way. Not everybody has a bad attitude about Christianity. And I told him, in fact, I think you like the people I worship with on every Sunday. And in fact, I think they'd be welcoming you. And I think they would be really cool with you just, wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt to church. That's fine. But I'm not going to change everybody's mind. And if I realize that, and I realize that my attitude will often prevent me from reaching people, and I can look internally and change that, who can I reach? What can I do? What can God do through me with a good attitude versus a bad attitude? Are we reflecting internally enough to say, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I've had my bouts. I've had my struggles, but it's time for me to change. It's time for me to see my life differently. It's time for me to look at people differently. I'm not saying this is everybody. I'm just saying this is where I struggle. This is where I have a problem. And this is where I find myself sitting in my room in the morning, self-reflecting. What is my attitude towards people? What is my attitude towards church? What is my attitude towards my work? Is it right? Is it in the right place? Am I doing the right things? And if I have an attitude like Jesus, what is my effect on my community? If you're here today and you have a need of any kind, you will need prayer, you want to take your next step in your faith journey by being baptized or starting a Bible study, we can do that for you if you come forward as we stand and sing.
Without hope or God, I would not.